Hi, boys and girls. We're going to read a wonderful story today, and then we're going to put our brains to use. So I want you to listen carefully, and I want you to pay attention to these beautiful illustrations. This story is called Agatha's Feather Bed. Let me turn this a little bit. Woo! Look where I am. Did you notice? I'm in our library. Here we are. I'm here, you're at home, I'm here in our library, so I'm excited for us to be able to come back to our library together and share this space. But for right now, we'll take things as we are. We're just glad to be going to school, right? Okay, here's a great story for you. This one's called Agatha's Feather Bed. I'm going to turn a little bit like this. There we go. This story is by Carmen, Deedy, and the pictures are by Laura Seeley. Look how pretty that is, right? Okay. It says Agatha's Feather Bed, not just another wild goose story. So here we go. Let's see. We're going to learn a little lesson here about where things come from. Okay, let's see. I'm going to try to show you more of the pictures than myself. Okay, there we go. Do you see that little shop sandwiched in between the two skyscrapers? The shop belongs to my friend Agatha. She spins yarn and she weaves cloth, which she sells. The patterns that she weaves are so amazing and the colors are so beautiful that people come from all over Manhattan to buy her wares. Now clearly this is Manhattan is the big city, New York, right? Okay, here we go. And I see here that from the rubber tree comes rubber tires. I see here from oysters come pearls. All right, so let's see what else we have. Agatha loves to talk and she tells wonderful stories. In fact, you could say that Agatha can spin a yarn better than anyone I know. Here's one that she told me the other day, and I know that it must be true because Agatha could not have made this tale up herself. One afternoon, a little boy was shopping with his mother in Agatha's fabric shop. He was very bored and he began playing with a shiny scrap of red cloth. Agatha leaned down and she said to him, "That's silk. Do you know where it comes from?" He shook his head. Here's a cotton ball, B-O-L-L, and it produces cotton. And dinosaurs, fossil fuel. Not sure how true that is. Okay. Can you see? "It comes from worms," said Agatha. "Worms?" he exclaimed. "Why, yes, silkworms," said Agatha. "Wow, what kind of worm does this come from?" he asked, holding up a ball of purple cotton yarn. "That's a very good question," Agatha replied. "That's cotton. And it doesn't come from a worm at all. It comes from a cotton ball, B-O-L-L, boys and girls. That grows right out of the ground." I want you to see these beautiful illustrations because I think, even look, they do the bordering. Laura Seeley, she does bordering on the pages, and it sort of reminds me of Jan Brett's work, right? Very pretty. "What about the rest of this stuff?" asked the boy. "Does it come from neat places too?" "Oh, yes. This is wool, and it comes from sheep. That's easy." "You're right," she said. "Now this cloth is linen. Feel how stiff it is. I'll bet you can guess where it comes from, or I'll bet you can't guess where it comes from." The boy thought, and finally he asked, "Well, where does it come from?" "It comes from a plant called flax," answered Agatha. "Let me tell you something that I tell all of my customers, especially children. Everything comes from something. Nothing comes from nothing. Just like paper comes from trees. Just like glass comes from sand. An answer comes from a question. All you have to do is ask." This made the boy smile. That evening, after everyone had gone home, Agatha went upstairs to her apartment. Several months earlier, she had ordered a new feather bed from her favorite catalog, BB Lean. It had just arrived that very day. Her old mattress was so lumpy and bumpy, it was like sleeping on coal lumps and cherry pits. Quickly she changed into her nightgown, and she brushed and flossed her teeth. She took out the tortoiseshell pins, and her long hair fell, until it lay in little swirls around her feet. Okay, so we have a feather bed. We have tortoiseshell hairpins. I'm not sure where the dairy products are coming from, but dairy products come from cows. So everything comes from something. Look at this beautiful picture. Notice her slippers. I love the slippers, right? And I'm seeing she's, I see a couple of heads here, and I'm just wondering, like somebody maybe, look, somebody's looking in the window. So I'm wondering if somebody's peeking. There's something that's setting us up for something to come in the story. Let's take another look. Then she brushed and brushed with her boar bristle brush, which comes from wild boars, by the way. She never even finished the 100 strokes that she was giving to her hair. She was so eager to try out her new mattress. She settled into bed, and in minutes, she was fast asleep. Okay, you can take a look. Lots to see on these beautiful pages. Agatha dreamed that her room was filled with strange sounds, hushed whispers and pitter-patter of little feet. Suddenly she awoke with a start as she heard her window close with a thud. She turned slowly in her bed, and she saw that standing across her windowsill there were... I want you to see. There were naked geese. Oh dear. They were shivering in the cold and covered with goosebumps. She caught them just as they had ducked out. Agatha stared and stared. You could have knocked her over with a feather. At last she opened the window and she asked, "May I help you?" The smallest goose, Sydney, stepped into the room. He pointed his beak, his pink little wing, at Agatha's bed and said, oh boy, what do you think they said to a woman who just got a new feather bed? And here they are, featherless. "We want our feathers back." "What?" asked Agatha. "Feathers, Agatha, feathers. You know, we've been listening. Everything comes from something. Nothing comes from nothing, just like paper comes from trees and glass comes from sand. The feathers in a feather bed don't grow on trees, my dear," he said. "Where did you think the feathers in that feather bed came from?" asked the little goose. Agatha looked at the bed, and she looked at the geese, and she looked at the bed, and she looked at the geese. Something in her sensed that the goose was cooked. "I have to tell you we mean business, Agatha," said Sydney. "I wouldn't mess with a gaggle of angry, naked geese if I were you. We're not just a bunch of quacks. This could get ugly." But Agatha had already made up her mind. She had worked hard to earn the money to buy that feather bed, and yet she thought, what about those plucky little guys out there in the cold? "I'll tell you what," said Agatha, a little down in the mouth. "Get back to me in 3 days and trust me." And she gave them her credit card so they could book up at the downtown motel. Taking this as a sign of goodwill, they left quietly. So she's going to pay for them to get a hotel room. That's nice. Naturally, she'd sent them on a wild goose chase. Then she didn't waste a minute. She went downstairs to her sewing room, snatched up her scissors, and she got to work. For 3 days, she did not open her shop. She did not speak to anyone. On the third night, just as they'd agreed, the geese came tapping at her window. This time, Agatha was expecting them. She had left the window open, and she smiled to herself as they popped in one by one. "We're back, Agatha," said Sydney. "We had a great time with that credit card, I'll tell you. They kept wanting to give us a bill, but we just said, no thanks. The last thing we need is another bill." And then, but he never finished his sentence. As he looked across the room, he saw hanging on the wall were 6 white fleecy coats. Agatha had spun and woven and sewn each one. The geese were extremely grateful and thankful and thanked her kindly. Each goose slipped into his new coat and took a gander in the mirror. As they were about to leave, Sydney turned to Agatha and said, "You know, Agatha, these are really magnificent coats. Whatever did you make them from?" Agatha sat up in her bed, and the geese saw that their coats were made from... You're not going to believe this, boys and girls. This is a great story. Look at her hair. The coats were made from Agatha's hair. And Agatha smiled and said, "Everything comes from something. I have your feathers, you have my hair. What's good for the goose is good for the gander, eh, Sydney?" "Oh, Agatha," said one of the geese, "you keep us in stitches. And by the way, Agatha," added Sydney, chuckling, "your hair looks just ducky. And lucky for you and for me that hair grows back, just like feathers do." Agatha says she's never heard another honk from her fine feathered friends. However, someone's been leaving fresh goose eggs on her doorstep every morning. Where do goose eggs come from, anyway? The end. This book was loaded with good humor. I hope that you were recognizing it. Let me see. Do we have a minute? The geese were extremely grateful and thanked her kindly. Each goose slipped into his new coat and took a gander in the mirror. As they were about to leave, Sydney turned to Agatha and said, "You know, Agatha, those really are magnificent coats. Wherever did you get them from?" Agatha sat up in her bed, and the geese saw that their coats were made from Agatha's hair. "Everything comes from something. I have your feathers, you have my hair. What's good for the goose is good for the gander." That's a cute little saying. All right, we're going to go to our deep into our minds to think about things that come from other things that we use on a regular basis, and I'm going to see you on the seesaw. Okay? Take care. I hope you like the story.